All right, and we are live. Good evening, Yang Gang. Thank you for joining Securing the Bag with Seth Underwood. I am your host, Seth Underwood, and like always, we have a lot to talk about and very little time to do so because the technological singularity is at hand and the machine elves wait for no one. But you know what's closer than the technological singularity? The 2019 summer Democratic debates, and I've figured out why my math has been so wrong for the past couple of days. It turns out that my laptop here is using the European date format, the month, day, year. Wait, no, hold on, that's American. I'm backwards on one of these computers, and it's just throwing me off. Okay, my main computer is using the European one, which is just so strange. These people over there with their croissants and their Brexit and their yellow vests and everything, they have no idea what they're up to. So I can say for a fact now that we are 16 days away from the 2019 debates. A little bit of news on that end. Kirsten Gillibrand is the 14th candidate that is confirmed to be showing up. I'm not sure exactly when the cutoff date is when they're going to stop allowing people, but I have a feeling that Kirsten might be the final candidate to be confirmed to be showing up to these debates, which is going to be pretty intense. That means we could probably do about 7 candidates per show. Apparently they said that they're going to do everything random, and we have a 1 in an 8 shot. I think Yang's math is running out to that he'll wind up right next to Biden, and that is the game plan. Once we get that, it's all game over from there. A little bit of a quick update just on the business of the stream here. As you can see, I am kind of cutting out the green screen for now. I can't get it to look good. So until I can get the production in a little bit, I'm going to just kind of go along with this. It's not great, but hey, we start from the bottom, and then a year from now, this channel is going to be bigger than the Young Turks. That's where we're aiming. You got to aim high. It's gonna be a little bit of a slow stream today. I chose some jazz music for the intro. It's a Monday. I'm no fan of Mondays, kind of like my favorite cartoon, Garfield, which is being completely, absolutely vandalized on the internet. I don't know if you guys have seen these Garfield comics where it's just creepy, like extremely unsettling, I'm sorry, John, types of eldritch horror, H.P. Lovecraftian stuff that I can't get out of my head. Garfield is in my nightmares, but it's okay because I've got a nice silky smooth pillow to keep me cool. It's a self-cooling pillow. Apparently, one of my followers went out and purchased one of these after I mentioned about it. I'm a little bit upset because I'm not going to get paid for that, like it's free advertising for this pillow company, and I mean, I guess I need to start getting advertisements if that just works like that. Come on, you're really making my decision to try to go through and not actually be, controlled by third-party advertisement requirements and everything. That was my entire spiel that I was trying to set up with in the last episode, and you go out and just totally prove me wrong. So anyways, like I said, it's going to be a little bit of a slower stream today. I'm a little under the weather. I don't know what's going on. It's we've been having a lot of rainy weather lately and everything, and it's just, oh man, I'm not as prepared for tonight's episode as I really should be. So it's going to be nice and smooth and slow and steady. I'm going to go a little bit into the basics overall of Andrew Yang. What I was thinking of earlier today is that I haven't really done a big job of saying who I am, introducing myself, why I support universal basic income, and the basics of what it is. I feel like they could go on, and I could actually get a decent amount of content. I was wanting to do this for the Dave Rubin followers who may have tried to join my stream on Friday, but obviously the dumpster fire that stream was, I don't imagine that any will actually show up today. Hey guys, how's it going, candidates? Hope you are doing well. I don't expect that any of these people are going to follow along today, but just in case, if anyone's curious, we're going to go into exactly what a value-added tax is. This is the funding mechanism that Andrew Yang is proposing for universal basic income, and we're just going to see how off the cuff I can do this, because like I said, I'm not entirely prepared. A little bit of the other kind of small things. We got Yang hitting 300,000 followers on Twitter, which he brings up a great point, that only 79% of Americans are on Twitter anyways, so the echo chamber is real, and I like to constantly think that I'm doing a much bigger job than I actually am, but a lot more people use YouTube, so maybe I am. That's up from 40,000 followers since February. That's incredible. 40,000 to 300,000. He, like I say, with so many things, he's ahead of schedule and on time. Let's take a look here. We've also got donations jumping significantly to 100,000 overnight. We've been getting much less than 50,000, which is what we need daily for 3.5 million. If you don't know, the first donation goal overall was 1.5 million. We met that, and they set the next one at 3.5. So we've got until June the 30th to make that requirement happen. We really have to kind of push. If you're listening to me right now, if you've got $1, send it over to Andrew Yang's campaign. I'm telling you, it's $1 for $1,000 return next year or 2 years from now. It's the best investment you can make. I mean, I'm not an economist, blah blah blah. You know, don't take any of my advice professionally, blah blah. But make this investment. It's good. It'll get you a lot of money. So we really need to go through and find ways of trying to make the point of like I feel like a campaign slogan of donate $1 for $1,000 and like get the word out there that it's in your interest to vote or to campaign. To donate to this guy's campaign, even if it's just $1. And there's a lot of people who I've spoken to who have said, I just want to see this guy up on stage just so that, you know, he's a part of the conversation. I'll throw him $1 here or there. So the more that you're able to talk about Yang, the more people are going to be interested and tell them, hey, just for the sake of democracy, just for hell, even just shits and giggles, give this guy $1. He's offering to give everyone $1,000 because, you know, you need a little bit of time in order to fully explain a universal basic income, which is the main primary point of today's episode. You know, I say this because after the Dave Rubin interview, or should I say during, I've never seen someone simultaneously called a socialist and a libertarian so much as Yang was during those 2.5 hours. It's so bizarre to me how like all of our conceptions of socialism and capitalism and libertarianism are coming to a head with the candidate Yang, because he's obviously forcing people to take a look and talk about exactly what kind of politician he is. Freedom dividend for 50 years is $500,000. Pretty good dollar investment. Exactly. That's exactly the point. That's incredible, actually, when you think about it, especially if you have a lot of kids. That's the point that he brings up. I do think when he says, oh, you know, they don't get it till they're 18, but when you know that they're 18, they're going to have financial security, there's a point in saying, oh, well, that doesn't help anyone now. That's exactly what I say when people are like talking about jobs guarantee or this or that. It's like, well, that doesn't help anyone now who needs to pay rent this month. It's so funny how they'll come through and say, we don't need to look at the long term. We need to look at the short term until it's anything else. It's so bizarre. Lots of cognitive dissonance there. So the universal basic income. What's good, Seth? I'm side-eyeing my cool pillow so hard right now. Also, maybe mentioning merch purchases helps too. Yeah, I really hope you enjoy it. One thing that I've noticed is that it's got like a new car smell to it that you'll want to probably put like a cover over it or something. It's probably going to die down in a couple of days, but that's been something that I've noticed. It's a little stinky, but it's cool and it feels great. So, you know, there's a balance with everything, I find. Or maybe I've just got like a weird pillow, so I've got no idea. So again, like I was kind of going back through and talking about here, I really need to figure out how to just like stay on a topic. I go off on tangents all the time here. Universal basic income and how it's exactly being funded. There are so many different ways of looking at this policy. There are more socialist-leaning ways. There are more libertarian-leaning ways. You can go through and give these broad kind of examples of, well, Milton Friedman was for universal basic income and Martin Luther King Jr. was for universal basic income. But obviously they approach the concept from very different angles. And there's a lot of criticism against Yang and his plan specifically. One, obviously, from people who are more economically conservative or libertarian and you know, are very kind of set in an objectionist kind of mind frame, you know, where you earn your own and taxation is theft, essentially. And then, of course, the more left-leaning slant is that, well, this isn't progressive enough of a idea because it's not being based upon a wealth tax. Is it redistribution? I'll kind of elaborate on that question in a little bit. But so like it's not exactly the most progressive way of funding it. However, with that being said, I do, as I've said before, think that it's a much more progressive policy overall than any of the other candidates are offering in the 2020 run up to the elections. Right? They suggested letting it air out for a couple of days. Oh wow, I didn't actually know that. Cool. I hope I haven't been breathing in any like toxic chemicals or anything. I don't think that there's anything like that. They say it's something in the technology of like weaving in the pillow and everything like that. I should probably read up and be a little bit more informed about what I'm putting my head on for 8 hours a day, but that's neither here nor there. So obviously there's a lot of confusion around a universal basic income. I need to spend a little bit more time talking about it and getting people informed. And the first thing I feel like we need to do is, one, have the conversation of, do we want a universal basic income? Why do we want it? I speak about the technological singularity, so obviously I like approaching this from the automation angle and talking about how, we can't be exactly, why is that always going off every 5 minutes? We can't be exactly secure in the idea that we're going to just constantly have well-paying jobs for all 350 Americans and, the already stagnating of the middle class, the dissolution of the middle class is a trend that we can expect to see continue forward, and automation is going to be a huge monolithic issue that we already have. So that angle is the first, and it's the one that I like to use with more conservative minds, because everyone can understand that a robot is much, much different than a human. And if you're talking about wealth creation and robotics, right, you can teach a man to fish and he'll fish forever as opposed to giving him a fish. But if you program a robot to fish and that robot then is fishing everything in the lake, doing it at a speed that a human could not compete with, that's something that both sides of the aisle can understand as a problematic idea. The ironic thing about this is that it's technically kind of what Marx was talking about, with the owners of production increasingly owning all of the wealth in the entire country, and the idea that I'm not even sure, I am not read up on my Marx, and I'm not entirely, I probably should before I go through and talking about what Marx talked about or what he didn't talk about. I'm not sure exactly if he ever approached the subject of completely autonomous labor, or if this is something that no one, even back then, could ever see happening, that's the point that I kind of make. Software is a new paradigm. We can think of the Industrial Revolution as hardware, building tractors and plows and things of that nature, but you still need a human operator, and you still need humans behind the wheel, behind the desk coding these things. Whereas software is, you can digitally replicate software for $0 or below $1. We're talking about cents, pennies on the dollar. Everyone can download Uber on their app, and it doesn't cost Uber an incredible amount of money to do so. It's completely different than providing a John Deere tractor to millions of farmers throughout the country. It's a very different type of automation. So there's a big appeal in saying we need a universal basic income, because Yang Gang, sorry I missed the start. I will catch the replay. Hi all. Hey, it's good to have you, Nash. Thanks so much for coming in. Landlords get UBI in essence from the lower class in that form of rent. No one complains about that. That is such a glaring problem that it seems like it's the elephant in the room is rent capitalism. Like, there's no type of, yeah, sure, there's property management and all like that. I was in real estate, believe me, I know all about it. But it's definitely like you're just picking up, residual income over time. And yeah, you'll make some decisions here or there, and it's not an easy task whatsoever, taking care and managing a property. But I guarantee most people would prefer to do that themselves than to just give half of what they make every month to these people. it's such a huge issue, and it is technically a form of universal basic income, but more corrupt in the way that, like, we're not even talking about robots doing work by themselves with minimal human interaction. We're talking about like human labor being sucked up by other humans, which is much more of like the idea of like Marxist, like, hey, this is the problem with capitalism issue, which you can either be completely down that angle or completely down the other way. I'm not really going to pick a side there because, again, like I love to say, the paradigm's moved on. We're now in just a completely different ball game. We'll get caught up in semantics and we'll never actually deal with the problem. And then next thing you'll know, self-driving cars are going to be on the road and it's going to get ugly really fast. So automation is the really good angle to take, even if it does kind of bring up the point of like, yeah, capitalism did not factor in for the fact that it's going to get eaten by its son technology, as Yang likes to reference. Marx would have liked the workers to own the robots taking their wages. That's exactly right. And in that way, like, that's why universal basic income is not communist. That's why a lot of the neo-Marxists do not like a universal basic income, because it's not seizing the means of production. We're not going through and saying, hey, you, the factory owner, we're taking over the people collectively, and all of the wealth is going to be owned by everyone. Equality of outcome, those types of concepts. Universal basic income is not that. And as far as you think of like cash as capital, which yes, it is. That's the only thing that's being spoken about here. And the issue, of course, here is that, like, even if you do think of cash as capital, you know what? Hold on one second. I think it's because this isn't plugged in. I've done a whole bunch of moving around, and that's just going to be extremely distracting. Intermission. All right, that's going to fix that right there. Jeez. There's always something. At least the cat's not coming around and totally messing up the entire stream. Okay, so as I was kind of going through and saying, as far as you can think of cash as capital and like the redistribution of that cash as a form of socialism or communism or something like that, then sure, we could have that discussion. But in that way, it's like anytime that you pay your employer a wage, that's a distribution. That's the main part that our economy currently runs on, is the idea that, wealth travels down through the entire country in the means of wages. And now if wages stagnate, if wages stop kind of increasing, if that money is not flowing through the economy, well, then you inherently have a pretty big paradoxical problem, in that capitalism runs on the fact that consumers purchase goods. And if consumers aren't purchasing goods because they have no money, because they have no wages, or then you're not able to actually keep the body running, right? The economy is a circular type of system that requires the flow of, like, the trickle down of wealth to the bottom, and then all boats are raised. That's the idea behind Reaganomics. So just looking at the fact that wages have stagnated for the past 40 years, just looking at the fact that this has also happened just alongside the increased and exponential adoption of robotics and increasingly automation. Looking at the fact that more than half, or just right at 50% of the country has negative wealth, like more than half of the country is in debt. Looking at the fact that 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, which immediately will get responded to by a conservative. Well, that's because they're terrible with money. People are bad with money, but I don't think that's any more so the case today than it was 50 years ago. People don't change that dramatically. And then looking at the fact that most Americans, 50% roundabout, can't afford a $400 paycheck or a $400 emergency without having to rely on friends or debt. So it seems clear that something's not working the way that we imagine that it should. And you can always go through deeper and explain, well, there's these problems which are also contributing to the fact, which, yes, absolutely. There's a whole bunch of, adverse incentives. There's a whole bunch of lobbying. There's a whole bunch of money in politics that is just corrupting things. And payday lenders being able to boost up their industry by using, these corporatist government stooges to make their industry profitable. There's definitely ways that you could increase wages through the system, but that's kind of not that's not the entire conversation that we're wanting to have right now, because wages just in general aren't going to matter as robotics and artificial intelligence and software don't need a wage. They don't need to take a vacation. They don't sue for harassment. They don't need to buy a new self-cooling pillow that's going to keep them just fuzzy and warm at night. Or cool, should I say. Yep, we can change capital flows easy. Just like Yang likes to say, that's all universal basic income is, diverting the river of money flowing to Amazon into canals and the individual. And yes, full employment is a stupid goal anyway. Absolutely agreed. I mean, full employment's never been something that has existed in the past, and we've had great economies, great quality of lives in the past. The concept of capital flowing through the society, you don't have to break the horse. You don't have to say, listen, we're going to take everything you have and you're not going to make money over time. Part of the entire idea behind profit making is that you make it, being someone who can receive income and profit over time is inherently different than being someone at the mercy of like their paycheck, at the mercy of losing their job, at their mercy. And this is increasingly the case as gig economy work, as contract work continues to take a bigger and bigger share of our economy in general. One of the things that I kind of started to notice was that going through school, I was being told, hey, in the past, you would be expecting to work one career, but it's increasingly the case that the average person will work 6 or 9, one of those numbers, if I recall correctly, careers over their lifetime. It's no longer the same paradigm that work is constantly shifting in these ways. And this was back when I was in elementary school that they were starting to tell students these things. And it's clear to see that the more that this happens, the more that we have to think of ways outside of the box to keep capital flowing in a way that's sustainable. I like to liken this to the entire circulation of a body. If the pore can be thought of as the legs and the feet, and the pore stops getting circulation, then the entire body is just going to fall down. So that's the idea of, do we need a universal basic income or not? This is entirely outside of the idea of do you deserve this or not? Leaving morality outside of the equation, which is, of course, the number one thing that anyone on the right will go towards, anyone of a conservative kind of mind frame will go towards, for good reason, as I've explained before. But leaving that entirely out of there, we have to have a functioning system. We have to have something that's not going to collapse upon itself, and that exists outside of morality in this case. Just the basics of we need consumers. Consumers is 68% of our economy. If no one's getting money, then things are going to get pretty bad. I was looking at why the government was established in the first place, and one of the things is to promote the general welfare. And so we go through and we see Donald Trump, packaging $16 billion in aid to go out to farmers. That's a form of wealth redistribution, and it's completely necessary. But the right will still turn around, and Donald Trump is going to make his entire platform going into 2020 that the Democrats are socialists, even though what he's done is a socialist act in its nature. The words are just so loaded that they don't make sense anymore. We're just knee-jerking reactions to these concepts that have long been in history books under completely different contexts, under completely different, entire paradigms. We've always been a country that strives towards freedom. But we've never been a purely capitalistic country. We've always tried to angle ourselves more towards that, and it's worked out pretty well in our favor, as many times as I can go through and criticize the system and what it has resulted in. It hasn't been this way forever. It has been a general progression of growth. Quality of life has gone up, but things are breaking down a little bit here. Because that being said, yeah, socialism in its pure forms has not worked out well whatsoever, because ultimately you're dealing with power hierarchies. It's never the people who are collectively actually owning things. It is a, representative, usually a charismatic demagogue who's going through and enriching themselves. This is, we can think of Maduro in Venezuela. That's another example of you want to have like good intentions of going through and doing this, but the path to hell is paved with good intentions. So we can kind of understand that, yeah, we're a hybrid system. It's neither socialist nor capitalist. And in that way, universal basic income exists on the same plane. Now, that being said, a universal basic income can inherently be more capitalistic or more socialist depending on how you choose to fund it. Ultimately, for the sake of economics, you don't want to fund a universal basic income by printing new money. Now, that being said, the United States economy is a bit of a different beast than Zimbabwe's, should we say, because when we like to think of hyperinflation, we like to think of Zimbabwe and when it printed out massive amounts, massive quantities of money, and it made it completely worthless. When the money supply is arbitrarily dealt with outside of the realms of supply and demand, that's exactly what you would expect to happen. But supply and demand in America and supply and demand in Zimbabwe are very inherently different, and it's completely out of the question to try and compare the two. The simple truth of the matter is that there is some degree of inflation that, whether you like it or not, that's how our economy runs on. Basically, if you're thinking about how you want to optimize an economy, you don't really want... There are some people swinging on the playground across the way from me. I cannot believe it's that loud. All right, hopefully it doesn't bleed through into the show. But you don't want an entirely deflationary currency, because you'll kind of see a little bit of what's happening with Bitcoin in the fact that it doesn't make sense for you ever to spend money, because by a deflationary nature, it's going to always be worth more the more that you have of it. Now, it incentivizes you to spend if you have a proper amount of inflation. Now, of course, you don't want hyperinflation in that you then have the ability to scale demand beyond the means that you have supply. Then you do get Zimbabwe. But we have to kind of keep in perspective the same exponential industry that is causing the entire push for a universal basic income. It exists, and it's provided a massive amount of surplus for most consumer goods that we have, that we need. Think food, think clothing. We throw away more food. We all obviously have more clothing than we need. Go and look in my girlfriend's closet. Shit, she might be watching, actually. I love you, Teeny. So, you want to strike that balance, and the Federal Reserve has set that at 2% per year. That's another problem, though, because if the overall pace of inflation over time is at 2% and wages stagnate, then every year you're worse off 2% if you don't get a raise, and that was kind of the overarching thing, is my rent's going up every year, but I'm still making $7.25 an hour. I was dealing with this. I am dealing with this. And it's just I can't keep up with the overall rate of inflation as a worker whose wages are being completely stagnated. And this is a good point as for why we don't want to just have the freedom dividend exist right at $1,000. We need to tack it to a overall form of inflation, or tack it to overall value of land. That's a good idea to kind of continue forward. And from what I do understand, Yang has said that we will tack the freedom dividend to basic staple goods and make sure that, as they raise in price, the universal basic income will be adjusted to allow for the supply of those basic necessities. So another concept to consider here is the idea of scarcity, which is a big thing that we talk about in the Yang Gang. But really quick, I'm going to take just a quick break and see what the chat's looking like. Don't hear it. The swings at it's fantastic. Thank the Lord, because they're out there, and it's going to drive me insane. But I'll make it. I'll push through. So, what is scarcity? Obviously, scarcity is the idea that there are only so many things that can go around. And we're increasingly approaching a time where abundance is at hand. And that's, something to consider with the autonomous technology that we have. I mean, you're going to have 3.5 million truck drivers completely displaced by trucks that can drive themselves. That with it produces a massive amount of wealth. With that being said, there's only so many material goods that the earth can provide. And whether or not you believe there's going to be enough for 50, 100 years, there seems to be good reason to seem that, we've yet to really dig into the earth, so to speak, for most things that we rely on. Issues of climate change aside, there doesn't seem to be a scarcity of the amount that we should be concerned for basic necessities in terms of building material and things of that nature. We need to continue to, build, make sure that more trees are planted and things of that nature. If we can think of food right now, current production of food, we've long, I think since like the 80s, been in total surplus. We throw away much more than we produce. World hunger could have been solved and increasingly is being solved many years ago, if not for the fact that we haven't quite worked out the best way of getting the food to the places that need it the most, because it does go bad over a certain amount of time. Now, I see this completely changing with clean meat or cultured meat. I envision that post-scarcity for food will be here extremely soon in the ways that you can have a clean meat bioreactor, from a single fetal cell, or I think that they can even do it outside of fetal cells, which is great, especially for vegetarians. But they're coming with this technology that out of this single cultured cell, you can produce 1,000 hamburger patties, massive amounts of quantities of meat produced without having to actually slaughter animals. And those bioreactors could be placed anywhere in the world, and right in this type of places that need it the most. And then boom, right there, you've got world hunger taken care of. Obviously, the planet is 70% water, so the water's there. The only issue is that we can't drink salt water. If we can find a way of reliably getting desalination techniques, especially with solar and renewable energies, which is essentially, boiling massive amounts of water, evaporating it, and then having it condensate down into a different container, and you leave the salt, and then you have potable drinking water. That's the main goal. If we can get that system down, and increasingly, there's nothing that humans can't do if we don't put our minds together. I envision that this will be solved increasingly soon, and the issue of water scarcity itself will also be a thing of the past. So you've got food, you've got water. Let's talk about land. Is land scarce? Well, no. There's much more land than there is biomass of humans, but there is area demand of land that is scarce. For instance, if you try to go and live in San Francisco or Los Angeles, because you want to be a part of the tech boom, the price demand of that land will be much, much higher than elsewhere in the country, because a lot more people are trying to exist in a cramped and increasingly small space. But I remember seeing the math, and it turns out that more than... If you were to take every single 7 billion, 7.3, whatever number we're at right now, humans, and put them together in one space, you could fit all of them in the state of California, and each would have a 25 by 25 foot square of land to themselves. So in terms of how much land we need, if we can find creative ways of spreading ourselves a little further outwards, and I understand that urban sprawl is not the best thing in the world, but it's a problem that we should try and tackle our best. or if we can find a sustainable way of creating mega cities and going vertical, more, like kind of the concepts of science fiction that you see in Star Wars and things of that nature, of these tall skyscrapers that people live in, interconnected amongst each other. And we can find ways of solving the overarching issue of land. How we'll solve the issue of rent capitalism, I've got no earthly idea, to be quite honest with you. My envision for the future is that, as we kind of get to self-driving vehicles, one, it'll let you live further away from a city. Traffic will be eliminated, so you can drive, 2 hours away, you can get into your car in the morning, go to sleep, and you can get there in 2 hours, and it'll actually be 2 hours instead of 3.5 hours, which I know is a rare commute time. So we want to make sure that we've got like electric vehicles and we have more sustainable, urban planning overall. But land can be solved, but it's definitely not as easy of a problem to solve as what the other things that I've mentioned. So we can establish that we have basic post-scarcity. Post-scarcity as a concept overall means that every single human on the planet would be able to have as much resources in their lives as they would ever imagine to want. And there's no conceivable way that would ever happen. There's just not enough on this planet for that to be the case. And if human population continues to grow infinitely, there's not enough resources in the entire universe. Eventually everything is scarce. But saying everything is scarce is what a conservative will love to do to shut down a conversation before it begins. It's pretty disingenuous because we do have abundance, and we have abundance for the most important things, and we can use that abundance to create much, much more abundance. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Freedom dividend will be indexed to within 10% of the poverty line. So the question that I have is, how do we index that to 10% of the poverty line? The last that I saw, they may have been changing the way that poverty was. This was Trump coming down and saying, poverty is now going to be defined as this. It's increasingly frustrating that it seems so arbitrarily changeable by an administration, because then at that point you're able to say, oh, hey, look what my tax cuts did. They lifted 3 million people out of poverty, when in fact it just changed the numbers and no one's really that much better off or worse. So we need to find a pretty sustainable way of making sure that the freedom dividend will continue to meet that line, that requirement. It's an issue that is beyond my pay grade, I'll admit, but I think it's an issue that we can solve if we have the smartest minds at our disposal. And in that way, it makes me very happy that Yang is so far out of the kind of political sphere, is that I'm sure his cabinet, himself with his degree in economics, I believe will be able to find the correct and sustainable way of doing so. Post-food scarcity destroys profit. Land value tax and dividend solves land rentierism. Tax the rent. I need to actually kind of continue to learn more about a land value tax. Taxing the rent, because I understand that in Toronto and places of that nature, they're trying to raise vacancy taxes on properties because land is being increasingly used by Chinese immigrants to purchase, and they just sit there vacant, but they're there kind of as disaster zones that if they can get out of the country if things go south, because who knows, it's China, then they can get out, they can sit in this property. So they get their money out as well. It's able to sustain itself outside of the Chinese economy as well. So I know that that's one way that they're trying to tackle it. Land value tax is overpowered. And that's increasing what I've seen, in every single respectable universal basic income advocate that I've followed has agreed that this would be the best way to kind of go through and do it. So I've yet to hear Andrew kind of approach that, and I hope that we're able to do a good job of kind of getting his opinion on it. These are the types of concepts that I wish that we were able to spend more discussion on instead of these bare basics. But the bare basics are important for the type of people who may be watching this stream after seeing the Dave Rubin podcast. So I'm going to quickly kind of continue through and finish that. And then we can get into more of the what ifs and this and that. So we can agree at the end of the day that post-scarcity can exist for food, for shelter, for clothing, all of the basic, like the bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy. The issue, of course, then is, if you're conservative, if you're more right-leaning, the idea is that, well, it's not within mine or the government's, authority. It's not morally correct to go through and say that we should provide the basics for everyone. And yeah, I've said before that I've grown up reading Ayn Rand, and I really kind of considered myself an objectivist at one point before I started grappling with the issues of, well, society in general, before I kind of saw that the story of objectivism is a utopian idea and utopias don't exist. You'll never have a society completely without disabled people, completely without people. And increasingly, like, disabled people, I think is like a term that is going to define more and more of us as we're unable to compete with robotics and as we're unable to compete with artificial intelligence. Like, we are all going to be disabled compared to these types of technologies. And so in that way, like, I'm not trying to say that we're going to be enfeebled. We can use it to empower ourselves and to change the dynamics, change the paradigms. Hell, if a couch potato parasitic video game streamer can make $10 million a year and be empowered in that manner, then we can find very, very encouraging ways to move beyond this notion that we're enfeebled or disabled, which is what a lot of people will respond to me with as I try to explain why a universal basic income is necessary. It's the idea that selfishness is a virtue and, you're able to completely sustain yourself alone, which, just based on basic human psychology and basic human interaction and social science, has never been the way that humans operate. We always rely on one another, and we're incredibly social creatures, and without it we quickly fall apart without social interaction. But overall, the idea is it's a very compelling one to a guy in high school who's grown up in the South and is surrounded by a lot of the overarching ideas. I think in terms of like a moralistic lens, the corrupting nature of altruism in the way that it's framed is something to be cognizant of. It's the same thing that I was talking about earlier with the path to hell is paved with good intentions, in the sense that you don't want to give complete power over to a third-party authoritarian type of central force that will decide who gets what. That's a recipe for disaster in itself. Unless the singularity comes along and produces a Scarlett Johansson-voiced, beautiful artificial intelligence, which is completely sentient and which is able to gain, intelligence exponentially, and it's able to be a non-biased participator and able to benevolently look over us all. This is the optimist view of the singularity. We're going to develop a genie in the bottle that you can go to and ask a question, and it'll say, give me the cure for cancer, and it'll come through and print out a sheet for you. Or it could just take control of the entire world, and we'll all basically be like babies in a playpen, from a benevolent overlord, hopefully not malevolent, hopefully. But there's no great way of that happening outside of such an event occurring. So yeah, all of us are going to be disabled soon, and as such, like, we can already see this trend happening. And if you've read The War on Normal People, then you've seen the place where he's gone through and shown how disability has just completely gone off the roof in the past couple of 20 years and everything. And ultimately, I've said this before, like, the weeks that I would make the most money when I was serving tables was the weeks that disability checks came through, and a lot of people would come to, like, the coworkers would like talk behind everyone's back, and this is awful, but they do. And they'd be like, oh God, here they come. All of the people getting their disability checks, because that stigma is just so powerful. And yeah, sure, I mean, the unwashed masses exist, and it was our duty to serve them. And yeah, maybe they weren't always as nice. A lot of them maybe didn't tip that well, but I did still wind up making the most money during those weeks. And I personally didn't care where that money came from. I didn't care that they got it in a check in the mail. It's sure it's coming out of my taxes in one way or another. I would prefer if more was being taken from the billionaires and the industries that pay 0%. But overall, I mean, I got it back. And like I said, the economy is a circular kind of beast. And, we can, with this insane and crazy wealth, we can easily justify universal basic income and not have it change anything at all. But before we get there, I'll have to continue along with the basics. We're going slow and steady here. I'm trying to get all of this out because I'm going to create a dividend report episode that's post-edited and does a clean cut 10-15 minute job explaining what what a UBI is and the value added tax that's paying for it. This is kind of just getting the juices flowing and the creative juices flowing. So let's see, where am I? I'm telling you, a little bit under the weather today. My mind is just all over the place. We're talking about post-scarcity in general, getting to the overarching idea. Once you agree, once you get to the place of all right, let's just say that we're going to do a universal basic income. The more libertarian view, of course, the one that disgusts the left most often is, well, you're going to go through and you're going to solve the bloated inefficiencies of the welfare state that currently exists and replace it with the universal basic income. And the reasoning behind this is Milton Friedman with his proposal back in the 70s is the current inefficiencies with means-tested welfare are severe. And you don't have to be on the left or the right to agree with that. And the idea that there is just places where this money that's being taken from our paychecks is just going into an abyss where the people in need aren't the ones who are getting it. And that there are kind of agendas within government bureaucracy to deny benefits, to increase revenues within their own kind of administration for their own kind of personal gain, or not personal gain, but overarching kind of administrative gain. We see this a lot with block grants and things of that nature, but that's a discussion for another episode talking about the inefficiencies of this welfare system. But we can agree that if you want to get $400 in food stamps to an individual, you shouldn't have to go through and spend upwards of $1,000 to have that happen. The math just doesn't make sense. We're spending more money, basically, to go through and justify the expenditure of tax money to people who deserve it. We're spending more money there than it would be just to get the money to the person. And in fact, there is a way of thinking of it that getting the money to the person increases revenues, increases profits overall, because then you've got a consumer who is then driving demand as he is using that money, which overall grows the economy. You get new jobs, you get growth. So the expense of sending $1,000 to someone in the mail could be thought of as a net positive for society, which is very different than the expense of sending an inefficient welfare check that's been sent through a bureaucracy of pencil pushers and people sitting down and writing a check. So there is areas that we can go through and greatly increase the efficiency and the end result. There are many people who do just get $400 in food stamps. They'd be much better to get $1,000, and most all data shows that they spend money first on themselves in ways that help them out, unless there is significant addiction problems. But those cases will be made a lot more clear now in the way that if someone's coming up to you after a universal basic income and they're saying, hey, I need some money, the very first thing that you're able to do at that point is say, I know that this person got $1,000. So what did they spend it on, right? That kind of shift in perspective helps make the people who need help more, who have deep underlying issues, they become much more apparent. They're not mixed in with a group of people who are maybe just down on bad luck. So the idea and the vision that I hold is that this will make it easier for us to see the places where we have people who are more in need, who need special care. And you can use the savings that we have with the universal basic income. Sure, the savings go to pay for the universal basic income itself, but hopefully overall we can agree, yes, let's bolster these systems, let's bolster these where more than just cash assistance is needed. But for the vast majority of cases, and studies on universal basic income shows this, unconditional cash benefits have cascading effects. They have the ability to improve mental health, which I'm actually going to go through here and kind of like explain. If you ever like see my head, wait, no, right there. You see it's kind of like, patchy and stuff. I have a condition which is known as trichotillomania, which means that I have an unaware obsession with like kind of messing with my hair and pulling it out. And this is driven by financial anxiety. It's a anxiety disorder. And that causes, that's my own thing, but being in poverty drives you insane. And this like stress and anxiety that I get is directly because of financial insecurity. And I'm lucky in the fact that it affects me in a way that is manageable. And I also have the ability and I've had a better life than many other people who have not had the kind of upbringing that I had. So I can completely empathize with the idea that like there is a whole bunch more issues and financial cost associated with the existence of poverty, that if outside of having those things exist, we're just no longer there, the savings involved will pay for the universal basic income itself. The math that Yang runs right now leaves about $600 billion that isn't paid for. And I'm going to go through and list out exactly how he's planning to pay for this. And he's kind of saying, we can expect that savings will get us whole or even above. And many economists, sure, from more left-leaning think tanks and things of that nature say, yeah, it will grow the economy. It's just a net investment. It's something that just makes sense to do. But my entire point is that even if it didn't, even if we do have to spend $600 billion to end poverty, then that's a good expense to have. And out of a yearly GDP of $21 trillion, $600 billion is nothing, absolutely nothing. We've got trillion-dollar corporations. The money is there. And if anyone goes through and says it's unaffordable, well, they're just completely wrong. And that's why I'm making this video, obviously. To not help everyone too, the targeting is so inefficient. Yep, this is what I was wanting to go through and talk about with Rashida Tlaib, or however you pronounce her name, on Friday's live stream before everything turned into a dumpster fire, is that her kind of policy proposal is going to wind up costing trillions of dollars, probably akin to the freedom dividend, because it's only being targeted at poor and working class adults, meaning you have to fund an administration which is staffing people to figure out who deserves the money or not. So we're still being caught in this trap of figuring out who deserves it. This is what I want to be focusing on. And this is what I want to kind of continue to push forward. This entire discussion that we're having is first and foremost a discussion about work and worthiness and very primordial concepts of what does it mean to be alive on the planet? What does it mean to be a member of a society that has, you've signed your social contract since birth. You're no longer in the natural world. You're in a world of man's creation. What does worth and work and these cerebral concepts really mean? It's discussions that we find people talking about during the Renaissance, where logic and reason are starting to be spoken about by people in taverns and things of that nature. And it's what humanity needs to continue to do if we're ever going to continue to have golden ages and renaissances and progress forward. I mean, if we had never had the discussion of, maybe feudalism is a pretty terrible system, we would have never left the Dark Ages. So we should be talking about, hey, you know what? Maybe this system is flawed in some pretty significant ways, and we can do something about it. Obviously, that conversation's been having for a long time. The universal basic income is just so unique in that, like, when you understand it to its core concept, it's like the best of every world you could imagine. It doesn't go too radically to the left. It doesn't go too radically to the right. Being like, hey, did you opt out or what? Serious inflation only affects consumerism. Is that a bad thing? What one needs is not what one wants. I would agree with that. And the goal of a universal basic income is not to supply like a luxurious lifestyle to everyone. It's not an equality of outcome. It's an equality of opportunity. I think likely the UBI will increase before Yang is out of office. I wouldn't doubt 2,000 a month, just a guess, based on nothing really. I just think UBI will work better than planned on the economy. I agree. I think once you get the foot in the door, once people go, whoa, okay, this works. And like, geez, over the past week, I've seen at least 5 times during, these threads that have been spurred on by the Dave Rubin podcast, or this most recent woman who was just talking about it. I'm going to bring up like tweets here on the screen and go step by step and go, this is what they're saying. This is why it's just nonsense. I'm going to do that at some point. But she was saying like, why should we do this now? And that's what people say is like, why wait? Why should we do this now? And it's like, well, one, if you wait too long, it's too late. Kind of like climate change. Once the world's on fire, if you decide at that point to start putting money into renewable energy and things of that nature, then it's too late. Society's already collapsed. There's no money to put, there's no system to put any money into. The money's worthless. The same applies for the universal basic income. Like, once these truck drivers are out of a job, because we know that tech adoption is exponential. There's that handy graph that I like to post on my Twitter account of time to 50 million adoptions of a technology. And it's like over the past 100 years, the time to do so has just plummeted down to a matter of days, like 19 days. And that's software, sure. It's going to be a little bit longer for self-driving cars, but it's too late. That's the main issue, one. But number two is that when you ask the question of why don't we do it right now, what you're really saying is like, oh, well, that sucks. This is going to be so expensive, and I imagine that like it's going to clog us down in some way. Instead of like understanding the research that's been done into it and see that this is actually like rocket fuel for the economy, that it's the solution to the mental health crisis, largely, not in every case, or it's at least the foot in the door to solving that problem, to the opioid epidemic in many ways, again, foot in the door. It's a solution to just so many things. Like, I can guarantee you, were I to get $1,000 a month, I would reach a state of complete contentment. Okay, maybe I would still enjoy, like, I'm still going to work for like my dreams and passions, right? But overall, like the way that you can just chill out and like say, okay, that's what's known as like the mindset of abundance. Right now you exist with a mindset of scarcity, which is a manufactured mindset. It's not a mindset that you had when you were a kid. I'm getting too far ahead of myself. I'm going to go ahead and back up here a little bit. And in terms of why should we do it now? All of these questions, they're missing the point, obviously. We need to do it now because it is the way that we move forward. It's the way that we fix the things that are slowing us down already. So it's so frustrating to hear people say that. And what I know will happen, what the data suggests will happen, what happened in Alaska after their yearly basic income, was that it passed, and it's the most like beloved policy in the entire state. The Basic Income podcast just recently did an episode about this pilot they're running in South Korea with, oddly enough, only 24-year-olds in this specific province. It seems very arbitrary. It's a little strange, but it's like to the point that this researcher they were interviewing said, I'm driving to work and I see on the billboard this I guess it's a PSA or something like that. about universal basic income. And she's like, you don't know how strange it is to see that, as someone who's been working on this for decades, to see the discussion starting to happen. Because once it does, and this is the other reason of why it has to be universal, the stigma associated with unconditional cash transfers makes everyone feel a mindset of abundance. I really should have gone through and talked about scarcity mindset first, but that's the point, is that once we get the foot in the door, it's just a cascading effect afterwards. It's going to be easy to bolster that system. I'd like to think, the same could apply to Social Security, which has been under attack for multi-decades. But Social Security only affects you when you're 64. So it's this concept that we all is favorable by a large portion of society, but it still is kind of a concept that's in the future at some point in time. This is something that would affect everyone, except for people under 18. But then it's still affecting your parents. And that's the point, is that the studies show that, like, you start off with one person and it just ripples out throughout the community around you. Even with, like, the Finland trial, it showed that the people are, like, experiencing less mental health issues, experiencing less overall well-being, hospitalization issues and everything. And those effects continued outwards into the people who were not receiving the income, but still existed within or nearby that same community. If you think about it, it just completely makes sense. If you've ever worked in the service industry, you've had people come in and just chew your ass off. But like, before you even start talking to them, they're in a pissy mood. The lifestyle, the society that we exist in is so high strung. I can't blame people for being in that mindset. It's frustrating, but it has a effect where it bounces around and infects people. The scarcity mindset. So let's discuss the scarcity mindset just real quick. You'll hear Andrew Yang talk about this a lot. And it's the idea that they've done studies in India with farmers. And they were looking at the times that the farmers were having a great harvest versus later in the year where they had spent a lot of the income associated with that harvest. It's the winter, the crops aren't growing. They gave them an IQ test, I believe, and they just kind of measured overall cognitive ability. And they were able to see that there was a 13-point difference, that they performed one standard deviation lower when they had less financial security than the times that they had financial security. So what they were able to show is that poverty is basically a self-perpetuating system, in that you make poorer, shorter-term decisions when you have less. And this makes complete sense if you think about it. How can you plan far ahead if you're most concerned about how you're going to, get dinner on the table Friday, or pay your rent by the end of this week? You can't make these long-term decisions. And the rich and the wealthy don't operate in that mindset. And in that way, when the rich and the wealthy are the only ones that are being represented in Congress due to the absolute corrupting nature of our lobby system, then the system will never change, because you're dealing with two different social classes operating with two different perspectives, with two different cognitive types of, like, understanding about the world. And that's a difficult thing to say, because we like to think that we're all human and we all operate within the same kind of perspective. But that's just simply not the case. There will never be any movement to end poverty by people who don't understand it. That's kind of a disturbing thought, but, And so, even with that being said, though, I think you get the door open, the foot in through the door. You want to make sure that while Yang is in office, that a system is made to protect the policy from attacks on it over time. Just in Alaska, which we talk about all the time, which I'm going to go through and explain here as well, The most recent election, I think the Republican majority came through and they decreased the overall dividend, which means that they're taking from this state-owned industry and they're filling the administration's coffers and the friends of the administration's coffers with money that otherwise would have been just going to the people of Alaska, money that was being directed to them and their children because of the natural resources that Alaskans live on. And they saw it happen, and they're reversing course now. They're changing who's in office. I believe the elections have gone through. He ran on, hey, we're going to bring this back to where it was before this election, and he got back in. So it seems very clear that it's political suicide after the fact, after the policy and implementation, to try to do anything with it. For most, a paycheck is just a permission slip to survive until the next month. The last government shutdown drove that home for me. Yeah, it's so bizarre. When you think about it more and more, you're really starting to realize we live in this completely arbitrary type of system that is the farthest thing from freedom that you could imagine. Now, I bring this up a lot. Like, if you own a resource that someone needs in order to survive, and then you tighten the valve on that resource unless they do something for you, well, that's just slavery with extra steps. If you were to think of yourself as truly free, you'd be living in a world in which the resources are available to you. You just have to go out and get it. And people will love to say, oh, well, hey, if you don't like the way the society is set up, there's nothing stopping you from going out into the natural world and doing that kind of lifestyle. Well, that's absolutely false. You try to go out and do that. Where are you going to be able to go that isn't currently being polluted by some nearby corporation or industry? Besides, they're not going to let you do that. Right? Like, if you remember what Waco, Texas was, if you try to start a community of people, because one, that's the thing, is a human cannot survive out in the woods by himself or herself, because we are social creatures. We don't just operate as a singular island. And then if you try to get more people in with you and start this commune or community, well, that's not going to work out too well for you. I don't think. If we're to take history and see what happened there. So that's just a bizarre thing for people to say overall. So freedom as an idea can exist with a universal basic income, though. And yeah, sure, $1,000 a month might not go very far if you live in a highly congested, deep in demand area. So move, that's the idea, right? Let's see a revaluation in exactly what is valuable. If we can't sustain an exodus of janitors and bartenders leaving, deep cities to go into more affordable areas, well, then that means that you'll see a correction. If we're to believe in the free market, then I assert that. I could be wrong about that. There might be some very deeply flawed aspects to that line of thinking, but overall, I would like to see that reevaluation happen, as I've said before. So we've got post-scarcity, we've talked about that and this. So the value-added tax. Boy, it is an hour into the live stream, and I haven't even gotten to the main point of this. Again, it's just off the cuff here. I did not do as much preparing as the other episodes, so if I'm doing any better or any worse, I would appreciate some feedback on that. The value-added tax. What is it? It's got the dirty word tax in it, and it's something that does not exist within the United States as a whole right now, but more European countries are adopting it. And if you've heard Yang speak, he said, if you think about the people who are getting the most wealthy from this type of automation, the big winners, they're paying zero in federal taxes. So we'll fix that by going straight to the supply chain. The value-added tax is applied along each point in the supply chain, whereas a sales tax, what we will normally see as consumers, is applied at the point of purchase. After the entire supply chain, it reaches the cash register. You, the consumer, pay the government for that purchase, and then the person behind the cash register is responsible for making sure that that is paid and goes to the government. So a value-added tax, on the other hand, if you're making pencils and you are buying the lumber, or you are, collecting the lumber, you're selling it to me, that sale is taxed 10% under Yang's plan. And 10% of that sale is then collected and put into a pot, which is the freedom dividend. So if you understand economics, this is immediately what anyone will say is, well, they're going to raise that price. And yes, we can assume, and we should assume, that price would be raised 10%. It won't be raised in every case, and any economist would tell you that as well. Businesses do absorb costs. That is a fact. Some people will assert that that never happens at all, but it does. Every now and then you'll have some of the profit eaten into. It's just how much of that can happen, how much competition. And you'll have to speak to people who are more ingrained within the economy, who are specialists and spend their entire time looking at this to tell you exactly what to expect among should we expect that full 10% increase. But let's just say that across the board, the 10% value-added tax is put on Amazon on every autonomous mile driven to be put into a value-added tax pot sent out to every American, you, me, your mother, your grandmother, and you go and buy a self-cooling pillow with it. So what does that look like? Well, obviously, they're going to come around and say that's a regressive tax and that's affecting the consumer and that hurts them more than the rich. This is a conservative policy in disguise. Well, no consumer tax, no regressive tax has ever in the same moment raised individual income across the board and to the degree, to any degree for that matter, that the universal basic income does. So for instance, let's just say at the end of the results, you see 10% more on the purchase of a hamburger. So that hamburger that you could buy for $10, now it's $11. Economic theory would say that you as a consumer would not purchase that good as often now because it costs more and your budget hasn't increased. No, it has increased. That's the main point here, is that the 10% value-added tax is kind of revolutionary as an idea. I just for a quick disclaimer, when I first started supporting a universal basic income, this was on the heels of Bernie Sanders' campaign. I was completely in the camp of let's just pay for this by taxing the hell out of the wealthy. And then the Panama Papers came out. So anyways, I'm going to come back to that in just a second. That's the thing. You can imagine that as a consumer, if you have $1,000 a month, the choice to purchase that hamburger, if the hamburger even has the VAT applied to it, we can assume that it does. That's not a difficult choice to make. You're winding up still much more positive, even among a 100% increase of the VAT to offshore the cost to the consumer. And that's kind of the interesting thing about it, is that this is a tax on consumption, if you think of it that way. First and foremost, in the areas like Amazon, which currently pay no taxes, they're forced to pay the tax along the supply chain. They can't get away from it. So unlike the wealth tax, you can't just offshore your wealth into a tax haven. Unlike federal taxes for these corporations, you can't declare that you're just not making a profit at all. Or that you're spending so much into research and development. These loopholes that are constantly being used to get away with paying zero. So you've got this $1,000, $12,000 over a year. Think about it. If you have the 100%, 10% increase in those goods, the average consumer, which has a salary of $75,000, the average American, only spends about $20,000 on goods that would have the value-added tax on it. So this isn't going to housing or healthcare or education. This is only going to those specific goods. So the average consumption of that is $20,000, meaning you would have to spend $120,000 before the next purchase is then fully a loss, right? Let's just say you've got $12,000 more dollars a year. And all of it has to be spent on the value-added tax before you start paying in from zero into that system. That's after your 120,000th purchase. So let's say all goods, 10% more, your budget's increased. Your consumption budget's now at $22,000, or that's the price out of your wallet. But you're still above $10,000 because you went from $20,000 in consumption as a budget, but you have $32,000 theoretically to spend on the same goods that you would have earlier. So it's a net transfer from high consumers, right? If you go out and you buy a $120,000 Ferrari, you're going to immediately spend all of the benefit that you just got from your yearly increase in income through a universal basic income. But chances are, if you're buying such luxury goods, you're not really noticing the effects of the basic income anyways. In contrast, though, you've effectively eliminated poverty, or much of the effects of poverty, for the entire population of the United States. Without Yang's ideas, we may experience a bane from the Dark Knight situation. I'm honestly kind of surprised that we don't see more, what's it called? Man, my brain is fried. I have no idea what's going on. But of course, I'm speaking about people taking things into their own hands and taking, I just watched Andrew Yang's hologram posted a video of Seattle and the homelessness crisis there. And it's just insane. At a certain point, like, you cannot live in these areas. You can't see what's happening to the world around you and do nothing. And that's the problem, is that there's a very big fear that things will start to go south, that the pitchforks will come out. We want to avert that type of reality. The dividend isn't so much about the money. The improved mental health of the population and reduction in crime will be beneficial as well. Nobody will steal your phone and risk losing $1,000 a month. I absolutely agree. And to hear people come back and say, well, why do the rich get it? As if, they'll bring up the point, they're like, inequality is really bad. This is more of that neo-Marxist type of rhetoric that I've been uncovering more and more of, is that it's not just good enough for a large portion of people to end poverty. They actually want like more of an equality of outcome. They want more of the power that exists at the top to be distributed. And okay, so there is more argument, I think, to be had that maybe $1,000 isn't enough, but I don't think that there's an argument to be made that the people at the top don't deserve any of it. I mean, yeah, $1 billion is insane. It's absolutely insane. But when you start going down that path, when you start really talking about wealth distribution on like a monolithic level, then you're playing with fire. You're playing with that same type of fire that I've been speaking about before. I'd rather us not go there, right? I'd rather us be able to eliminate the systems of these systemic issues at the very basic level. Because I think what you'll see at that point afterwards is the pulling together of resources. I live with 3 roommates. Our entire apartment income would be $48,000 before work. And then we're able to make our own decisions. And then the economy will have to bend the knee in some way or another to people like myself, to people in similar situations as me. The issues regarding people who are stuck within areas that $1,000 may not go as far as, I expect that, the kind of compounding effects elsewhere in the country will reach those areas as well. We'll see the correction that I started to talk about. It's such a paradigm shifting reality that's why it's so important. Even if it's just $1,000, even if I would say, yes, I agree, it should be more. 1 and 0 are like infinitely different numbers, right? In one case, you actually have something. In the other case, you actually have nothing. And you can do something with something. You can see things happen with something. It's like, where does it go from there? The possibilities are endless. It'll make one for all and all for one more than just a catchy phrase. That's exactly right. You'll see a type of general well-being, and that other people aren't viewed as competitors. I think Andrew Yang mentioned this in a tweet earlier today, in that, this was actually brought up in the Basic Income podcast about South Korea, is that they were asking these recipients what did this do for them, and they said, when I'm like looking at my peers in my friend group, I'm not judging myself based on them like I did before. When something happens that's good for them, I'm just happy. Whereas I used to be jealous, and that jealousy made me act out in ways that I regret now. That's so transformative. That is a beautiful concept. It's the difference between the scarcity mindset and the abundance mindset. That type of envy that these neo-Marxists will be projecting outwards about, well, the really super wealthy, they're still going to be really super wealthy. Yeah, they are. They are. Sure, I guess that sucks, but they're still going to be unhappy. A lot of them will be. Money doesn't solve the kind of existential spiritual problems that all humans deal with. Those kind of things will never be solved by money. You should feel more sorry for them. Right now, it infuriates me every time that I hear a Catholic say, well, the rich are the burdened because they will go to hell if they don't put more effort into repenting. They'll spend more time in purgatory. So you should feel empathetic for the rich. Like, that makes me want to lose my freaking mind every time that I hear that. But I think after we take care of poverty, that it will actually be a easier thing to say, an easier concept to try and provide. That, yeah, you will have more luck being in poverty and reaching a state of happiness afterwards, because you've been dealing with the kind of gritty reality, whereas you could be a little bit more further removed as someone who's just wealthy. I've spent like a whole bunch of time, and I highly recommend anyone who's watching this live stream to try to adopt a practice of meditation in your daily life. It will significantly improve your overall well-being in ways that you just can't get through dieting or exercise, although exercise can be a form of meditation. Some people naturally meditate, and that infuriates me because I don't. I can't do it naturally. It's a spiritually changing idea which is happening, and it's also infused with technology in a way. The issues of technology, and that it's replicable for zero cost, is also kind of a boon for technology. Or like, you're able to experience things, and this is even shown in consumer polls of people who spend their money, and the questions asked, like, what goods have the most bang for their buck? One of those goods is video games, because you can get thousands of hours worth of use out of those goods. Whereas for other things, their lifetime and their use for people is significantly lower. So I'm kind of a tech evangelist, and I completely am in love with the idea of virtual reality, especially the more surreal concepts like Neuralink and things of that nature. That's the solution to land scarcity right there, right? And it's also the solution to Fermi's paradox, which is the idea of why don't we see aliens? Well, one of the ideas is that aliens just don't exist. It doesn't make sense for that to be the case, because the math involved with how massive the universe is says that aliens should be everywhere. And one of the solutions to Fermi's paradox is that they go inwards into virtual simulations. If you've ever thought about Inception, the same kind of idea exists, that you're able to go down this chain of layers of simulations. Sam Harris and Nick Bostrom, you need to go and check out their podcast about this, because it is such a cool idea. And the craziest thing about this is that if you are to accept the fact that, like, if we can get to a computer which is powerful enough to simulate a universe of our size, if we could, get the math of how big the universe is and then simulate it, once it's proven that that can be done, then the odds of us being the top layer of a simulation are infinitesimally small. Like, once that computer's made, and once it's seen that we can have that type of technology, we can pretty much be secure in the idea. What that means outside of that is open to interpretation, but we can pretty much believe that this is all just a simulation. Hey Seth, want to play Striking Viper? John, I thought you'd never ask. Let's log in. If you're poor and somebody likes you, you know that they like you. If you're rich, you'll never have that peace of mind. What is that peace worth? That is a crazy idea that I have thought about, and that it's also an issue of scarcity in a way, I think. If you're incredibly rich and people are just using you for money, I constantly think, man, I gotta meet some rich people because I would just sit down and play like Super Smash Brothers with them, and like, and yeah, get money from them, but also hopefully connect with them too, unless they're like vapid and just completely, I don't know. So I would hope that would improve things as well, because there is a complete loneliness that's involved with having wealth. Yeah, they do deserve empathy for sure. I think a universal basic income would help all people, even the rich, with that, especially, I don't know, the depressed Spidey. Oh, I thought that it was just a facepalm Spidey. And so, man, that's a huge tangent right there. I have kind of been droning on for a little while here. So I'm thinking about like doing a after show to these live streams. If you guys are interested, I'll be doing like, I don't know, maybe some video gaming, but I'm thinking I need to do it on a different channel because I don't want to get things too confused on this, but I want to be able to do some sort of like, video game for Yang and like grow the movement to donate money to him, because we need to get to 3 million, 3.5 million. No, is it just 3 million or 3.5? Yeah, I'm thinking Twitch will be what I do it for, because no one games on YouTube, and if they do, they're weird. I could do multi-stream. I don't know if I'll call it the same thing or not, because I've got 100 and something subscribers already, so I should just go along with that, but who knows. I need to get an Elgato video card for my computer so I could do like Super Smash and things like that. E3 is happening right now, and I can't contain myself. I'm so excited. I'm missing it for you guys, but that's not a hard decision at all. Okay, I can't believe Sony's not here this year. Oh my gosh, the what is it, Elden Ring with George R.R. Martin and Miyazaki. First and foremost, I am a video gamer. Like, that is my passion in life. I love it to death. I've got an Oculus, and that's kind of what sent me down the path of a universal basic income, was understanding that like things are getting more and more virtual. And then I read Ready Player One, and I saw the collision of these worlds. And I sound like a lunatic when I talk about this right now because it's kind of such a far out idea, but it's so realistic to me that like the economy is shifting into a completely digital kind of world. I mean, hell, I played World of Warcraft, and you were able to, like, if you had a max level character, you could sell that for stacks. I mean, people would buy that. It's a valuable thing to people, and we're advanced enough that value can be found in bytes and ones and zeros, and that is, we got to talk about that more. Like, am I wrong to say like, hey, like this, like to throw the flag on the field and say this is, we got to turn our attention to this. This is the epoch is changing. Like, we're in a new era and no one has noticed it. Oh yeah. I mean, they're live streaming it, so I can just easily go through. Like, Sony's not there, so I guess there's not much to miss. But tomorrow, Nintendo's at 12, so it's just perfect. Hell, tomorrow the Dividend Report is just going to be about Nintendo. I don't know. I'm sorry. No, it won't be. So, I mean, nothing's ever going to beat the real world, but you could definitely solve like the real estate cost associated with office spaces, especially if you just go in to sit down at a desk. All you got to do is really get to a good point of like being able to record and translate facial expressions down to the minute detail of happiness, sadness, so that you can interact with coworkers in meaningful ways. And like, it makes total sense that this will be the path that we go, because if it's a digital interaction, I can't, you can't go up and grab someone's ass in virtual reality. Sexual harassment, boom, out the window. Harvey Weinstein, never gonna happen again. You can't like physically assault people. the terrible thing that happened in Virginia Beach just a couple weeks ago, you know, overall too, the cost associated with just owning a space that people go to sit down on a computer with is it's just crazy. It's so crazy. If you're going to be a competitive force, you're going to automate. Well, yeah, you're going to automate, obviously, but you're also going to build a virtual space. We're already seeing this with Walmart, that they're building virtual representations of Walmart that you can walk through. You have an avatar that is correctly scaled to your body proportions, and you're able to pick up like a dress, because this is going to be what girls will use virtual reality for. You pick up a dress and you just pop it on. It immediately understands what kind of what's the perfect fit, because you've already specified it in some way, and you're able to look at yourself in the mirror and have yourself entirely scanned in. I spoke to someone who scanned themselves into virtual reality back when I was doing my podcast. He was a Google employee. It was crazy. His face was right there, and he was like, "Yeah, this is exactly what I look like." And you're then able to take that dress, pop it into a to-go basket, and then it ships it off to you in the mail. How many employers need to be involved in that? You know, automation in that way doesn't even really require a robot. It doesn't require hardware other than the cost of the consumer good that you're using. This is another example of how wide the brush of automation is. Like, this makes sense. This makes complete sense. It makes so much sense that I'd be surprised if we don't see this happening very quickly. The Oculus Quest just came out. I'm wondering how successful it's been. Paid real millions of dollars for virtual property. Yes, thank you. So obviously Second Life was a thing, but you go to YouTube and type in, there's this video that goes into the most expensive video game purchases, and it's not just Second Life, but it's incredible. There's been $1 million purchases for virtual real estate. And obviously, Second Life didn't turn into that type of economic monolith that they were speaking like it might have. But virtual reality is so different because your grandmother can use it. I have put my grandmother into virtual reality, and she's picked it up like it was second nature. So when you log into the Google, the equivalent of the Google browser, when you put that headset on, it's going to be Times Square. When your eyes first see, bam, it's going to be Coca-Cola putting their name right there for everyone to see. The main street of the virtual world. This is an idea that goes. This was Snow Crash with Neil Stephenson by Neil Stephenson. What was it? The Metaverse. It makes total sense. Yeah, sure. Second Life didn't take off, but Google's the richest country in the world. So, boom, right there, traffic is even further reduced because a large portion of work is put into the digital world, into the virtual world. It's insane. It's totally insane. You've got people purchasing made up worlds. You've got people purchasing video game characters. Millions of dollars of worth. It's already just gotten completely out of hand. I could talk about this forever. I'm going to continue to talk about it in future videos to come for sure. But I think here at an hour and a half, the longest live stream yet, I am curious for feedback, of course. If this kind of format works a little bit better, a little bit worse. I'm working on the production of this and everything. I may be taking a break for a couple of days while I work on a actual dividend report video. I want to make sure that the people who enjoy shorter videos have their the ability to watch that. Again, I'm looking for 1,000 subscribers, so hit the subscribe button. Share this with the other Yang gang. I'm looking forward to working with Nerds for Yang. I'm hoping to reach out with him at some point. I might collab in some way. Give him a follow as well. And Right People Made Bank on intro. Yes, that was one of the points that they brought up, and I had never even heard of this game, and I'm a video gamer at heart, and it was millions of dollars worth of purchases. And thank you so much, Nash. I really do appreciate it. Guys, Yang Gang, that's going to do it for the show tonight. Thank you for joining in. We're going to be securing the bag all month, and it's just going to get more exciting from here on out. Real quick, 5,000 years ago, peasants were amazed anyone would pay for letters printed on lots of papers. That's a perfect example. That is a perfect example. And like, that's the thing, is our concept of what is valuable is ever shifting and ever expanding. I want to just people need to talk about this more. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Take it easy. Have a good night.